The NFL draft is on the horizon. Eric Allen here at One Jets Drive with Brian Baldinger and Leger Duzable. So for months we've been talking about who are the Jets going to select at number 10 overall. Let's play some scenarios out though and say, how about a trade? How about a trade in the first round? Where do you see potential flashpoints from 1 through 9 before the Jets are scheduled to go on the clock there, Deuce?
Yeah, when you look around, I would say 7 is where it starts, Baldy, because you got to think the Tennessee Titans, depending on which route they go, right? Will they go offensive tackle? Will they go playmaker on the outside? Yeah. If 2 of the top 3 guys are gone at pick 7, then if you're the Jets, maybe you're concerned Chicago might take one of the playmakers. You assume the Atlanta Falcons most likely are going to take an edge defender. So maybe you call Atlanta and see what it would cost to move up just 2 spots. Hopefully it doesn't cost you too much. And the Falcons aren't worried about the Chicago Bears potentially taking their edge guy. That's the conversation where you start having that conversation where can we move up to? I think anything above 7 is going to cost way too much. But to me, it's right around that 7 mark, 8 and 9. That's the conversation that Jets have to have with the Atlanta Falcons and potentially moving
Paul,
on.
do you feel the same way? Because a lot of people are looking, including Deuce, and saying New England might try to get out at 3, potentially.
Arizona can look to get out at 4.
The Chargers at 5, they're starting
the
a new
Giants
program.
are a team that might want to move up if there's a quarterback there that they really covet. There could be potentially a lot of movement in front of the Jets.
Yes.
That could really affect their selection at 10. And it might start before the draft. I mean, some of these moves, Leger, might get made before the draft, just so that you know you're in a position and then you can evaluate things. But I think this is going to be a draft where, the quarterbacks are going to drive it because we all know what their names are by now. They're going to drive it. And then it's a question of, okay, some of this receiver cluster that's sitting up there with Marvin Harrison right now, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, how does that cluster filter down? And then if you're a team that really covets defensive players, and you get a couple edge rushers that are out there right now, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, where do they come in play? And then we haven't even gotten to the tackles. Yeah. This thing it could really.
It's fluid.
It really is.
Tennessee holds that 7th overall selection.
Yeah.
Then Atlanta at 8, followed by the Bears at 9.
Correct.
Before we say, okay, you're going to move up in the draft, tell me the players for the Jets that would be worth considering actually making a move and giving up future assets for.
To me, there's probably only one, and that depends if he's there. Now, we talked about the top 3 receivers. We talk about Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. And if Rome Odunze is there at pick 8, that is one guy you consider moving up for, because, Baldy, we kind of assume that the Arizona Cardinals are going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. Kyler Murray needs a true number 1. He lost his number 1 and number 2 receiver this offseason. And the Malik Neighbors is kind of the wild card, right? Will he go 5 to the Chargers? Will he go 6 to the Giants, right? Will he potentially be there at pick number 10? Nobody knows that as well. Could he go 7 to the Tennessee Titans, even though they already paid Calvin Ridley? So he, to me, is the wild card out of the 3 receivers. But if those 2 guys are gone, that's why I say about around pick 8, if there's only, Rome Odunze left on the board as far as the big 3, that's where the Jets probably consider taking a receiver, because I think the Atlanta Falcons are going to take an edge guy.
Would you consider going up for any of these offensive linemen, starting with Joe Alt or Olu?
Only if I'm in love with one of them. Okay. That might be sliding. Only if when I'm absolutely know that this is a guy that we're going to build for the future. Whether it's Joe Alt at left tackle, whether it's Fuaga at right tackle, whoever it might be. Only if you're absolutely after stacking your board with your offensive tackles, nothing's getting me off of this. Nothing's taking me away from Fuaga. This guy I already got his number in a Jets green. That type of conviction, if you have that kind of conviction, you might think about it.
All right, GM mindset though. If you're Joe Douglas, you never can have enough draft selections. Right now, the Jets scheduled to select number 10 overall in the first round. They don't have a second-round pick.
True.
That went to Green Bay because of the Aaron Rodgers deal. Jets overall have 7 selections. How much, if you're Joe Douglas, are you thinking about getting a second-round pick back?
I mean, you have to be thinking about it hard. We know a second-round pick is a premium pick, Baldy. That's a guy that you're probably depending on making an immediate impact on this roster this season. So not having a second-round pick, I think, is in the back of Joe Douglas's mind, right? You get to pick 10 and, the board falls where there isn't any of the top 3 receivers. You got to be, picking up the phone calls of other teams are calling you. Now it also depends on how far do you want to actually drop back to solidify yourself one of the top blue chip players in this draft. So we're not having a second-round pick. That is definitely in play with Joe Douglas potentially picking up calls from teams, and then teams where you look at maybe, the Denver Broncos, the Vegas Raiders, the New Orleans Saints, the Indianapolis Colts, the Seattle Seahawks. It's in play because you can pick up a second-round pick by trading back and still get a blue chip player.
I'd be curious if we could sneak into Joe's office right now to
Look,
look at the
Yeah, we'll go right down the hall right now.
Like,
He's not busy.
Like, rarely is there 32 first-round picks.
No.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a great
Sometimes
point.
there's only 24, 25 first-round
Correct.
picks. And the strength of the draft is in that second round.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where, you can get a marquee player in the second round because of how it falls. The quarterbacks get pushed up.
Yep.
The receivers get pushed up. And then you're sitting there going, okay, like one of these quarterbacks might drop. Who knows? And here's Denver. Here's the Raiders. Like, let's jump with the Jets.
Correct.
And you could trade back. And if you could get that second round pick in a draft where I feel like there are marquee players that will be there at 10. But maybe it doesn't fit what they want this year.
Correct.
Where you're pushing these chips in. And if you could get, that second round pick back and still get yourself the first rounder, like, that's a conversation that you might not have until you're on the clock.
Mm-hmm.
When things are starting to move and slide, and all of a sudden your board says, wow, we could get our player at 14. Let's make that trade.
Here's what I'm wondering, and this is all connected, as you guys know. You guys talk about the quarterback dominoes. You both believe that we could see as many as 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 6 selections.
Yes.
That would be obviously Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy. How do these other teams behind the Jets feel about a guy like Michael Penix?
Well, that's where teams get antsy.
Yeah.
And this is what we were talking about, Baldy. So if you're on the clock at 10 and the Vegas Raiders, they realize that maybe Denver wants to jump them to get a Michael Penix Jr. And they're like, well, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to call the Jets and see what it would take to get to the number 10 spot so we can solidify and get our guy for the future. So if you're a quarterback-needy team, right, do you stay pat knowing that 4 guys go in the top 6? That bodes well for the Jets depending on how the draft board shakes out. Because if the top 3 receivers are gone, now you're like, okay, it's overpay season, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to overpay to move up to the number 10 spot.
Well, these are real conversations. These are real scenarios that Joe Douglas is having with his group, that Denver's having with their group. And then to take it even further, LeJay, what's the compensation we're willing to give?
Correct.
Like, it could be just straight points. Okay, this is, you got to give up your set, whatever it is. But like, these conversations and these draft scenarios are happening every single day.
Yep.
If Michael Penix is a guy that Sean Payton covets, and we both love him.
Yep.
And so, like, you could see 5 getting into the top 10. Somebody calling the Jets, calling Chicago. Like, let's make sure we get our guy. The quarterbacks are driving it, but how the Raiders think, how Denver's thinking, how Seattle's thinking at 16 right now is Michael Penix, offense coordinator, is now the offense coordinator in Seattle. How do they feel about him? Like, that could be that 5th quarterback, or who knows? Maybe one of these other guys drop.
Can you talk about how the Jets' needs are connected to everything at play here?
Yeah.
Because people have talked about this wide receiver class. Not only is it outstanding at the top, but there are a lot of interesting depth targets down the line. And also, while people are high on the tackles early, it seems like it probably is going to fall off after the first round.
Yeah, so when you look at it and you look at the needs that the Jets have, and you talk about the top 3 receivers not being there, a guy like Brian Thomas comes into play and around the teams. We talked about a few teams that could potentially trade up, whether it's the Denver Broncos, whether it's the Las Vegas Raiders, and that's literally where I have him marked at, going somewhere between like 13 and pick 20. So right there, you can still feel a need with a blue chip pair. And there's a fall off between Brian Thomas and the top 3, but we talk about tiers all the time, right, Baldy? Tier 1, tier 2. To me, Brian Thomas is tier 1.5. He's not in tier 2. There's a difference between him and then the rest of the receivers in tier 2 as well. So talk about a guy that can really stretch the defense, right? Blow the top off the defense. And he was a monster in the red zone. You talk about going up and high pointing the football, 17 touchdowns.
Size, speed.
Yeah, so like, my thing is the Jets, say they do miss out on the top 3 receivers, there's still great value in trading back, getting extra draft capital, depending on what it is, and then still getting a really good playmaker on the outside.
At this point, would you say more likely down than up?
I would.
I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if they're going to trade, I would say it's more to go down, to still get one of the elite players Lejay's speaking of, and getting extra picks.
We'll have to see how it all plays out. In the Motor City, these guys are continuing to move. Brian Baldinger and Lejay Douzable.